What happens when one of the last genuine movie icons in Hollywood, a man who has spent over 40 years shaping cinema on his own terms, steps onto a late-night stage expecting a respectful conversation, only to be greeted with cheap shots about the lowest points of his career? What unfolds when someone who built his legacy through bravery, resilience, and unwavering creative conviction is suddenly faced with a host who confuses cruelty with comedy? And what happens next is the moment that changed everything. Kevin Costner walked into that studio believing he was there to talk about the project that had consumed his life, a film saga he'd fought to make, funded himself, and defended against every voice telling him it would never succeed. But instead of a genuine discussion about his work, he found himself ambushed with jokes about failures the world has already heard 1,000 times. That's when the interview stopped being entertainment and became something unforgettable. Because this wasn't just another celebrity getting irritated on a talk show. It wasn't just a tense moment between artist and host. It wasn't just a line crossed. This became the instant Kevin Costner reminded everyone why he became a legend in the first place. This is the same man who pushed forward with Dances with Wolves when studios insisted it would fail spectacularly. The same man who built Waterworld despite being called insane. The same man who walked away from Yellowstone, one of the biggest shows on television, because his passion project meant more to him than a guaranteed paycheck. And in this moment, he reminded the world of a truth Hollywood often forgets. Real artists don't chase approval, and legends don't sit quietly while someone belittles their life's work. For months, Jimmy Kimmel's team had been trying to book Costner to promote Horizon, the sweeping multi-film western he spent years developing, even mortgaging his own land to fund. At 69 years old, Costner was gambling his legacy, his finances, and his future on a vision the industry dismissed as outdated, an old-school epic released in chapters, made for an audience studios insisted no longer existed. He had everything on the line, and expected at minimum respect for that courage. His publicist couldn't have been clearer with the show's producers. Focus on the film, the vision, the risk, the craft. Avoid the tired jokes about Waterworld. Skip the endless jabs he'd already endured for decades. But behind the scenes, a very different plan was forming. In Jimmy's pre-show meeting, surrounded by writers who had spent years leaning on political zingers and celebrity roasts, someone pitched the idea. Waterworld jokes always blow up online. Another added, this new movie? It's basically Waterworld on dry land. He's gambling everything. It's going to flop. Jimmy hesitated, but only for a moment. The temptation of easy laughs and viral clips proved too strong. He assured the team they'd talk about the movie, but he wanted to have fun with his past too. What Kimmel called fun, Costner would soon recognize as the same lazy ridicule he'd endured his entire career. For decades, critics had misinterpreted Costner's artistic bravery as arrogance. They mocked his ambition. They reduced his creative risk to punchlines. But what Jimmy and anyone who has never created something meaningful failed to understand was this. Kevin Costner had spent 40 years surviving that exact treatment. Not by laughing along, not by shrinking, but by remembering what he stood for. He didn't make Dances with Wolves to win the approval of people who claimed westerns were dead. He didn't make Field of Dreams for executives who thought the concept was too strange to work. And he certainly didn't build a 4-decade career by letting comedians define his worth. Because this was never about whether celebrities should take a joke. This was about an artist refusing to let someone reduce his life's work to a punchline. This is the moment that draws the line between comedy that punches up and comedy that punches down. Between humor that reveals truth and humor that simply wounds. Between jokes that take courage and jokes that target the easiest possible victim. The person who dared to dream bigger than playing it safe. Jimmy Kimmel thought he was doing what late-night hosts do. Making harmless celebrity jokes, generating viral clips, and keeping viewers entertained. What he didn't realize was that he was about to mock a man's life work to his face, trivialize genuine artistic courage for cheap laughs, and discover that some people would rather leave your show than laugh at their own diminishment. And Kevin Costner, having faced decades of criticism and survived every disaster Hollywood could throw at him, had finally reached that point. Costner is one of the last true artists in Hollywood. Someone who makes films because he believes in them, not because algorithms say they'll succeed. And when he'd had enough of Jimmy's brand of disrespect disguised as comedy, the result wasn't just television gold, it was a lesson. Some things matter more than ratings. Artistic integrity isn't a punchline, and those who risk everything to create something meaningful deserve far better than mockery from people who risk nothing. Get ready, this isn't just a walk-off. This is the moment a man who spent 40 years proving doubters wrong finally said, "I'm done proving anything to anyone." The Jimmy Kimmel Live studio buzzed with the usual late-night energy the audience settled in, expecting predictable jokes and viral moments. Costner's booking, however, had sparked genuine excitement behind the scenes. Here was a real movie star, someone whose name alone conjured cinema history, not just another actor plugging a streaming release. When Kevin walked onto the set, he carried the same quiet confidence that had defined his entire career, not the anxious energy of someone chasing relevance, but the solid presence of a man who'd never mistaken fame for importance, success for meaning, or box office numbers for artistic value. At 69, he looked every bit the part of someone who had truly lived. His face marked by character rather than mere years, his demeanor exuding comfort in his own skin. Because he had never pretended to be anyone else, Jimmy's introduction ticked all the expected boxes. Our next guest is a two-time Academy Award winner, a director, a producer, and someone who's about to release one of the most ambitious film projects in recent memory. Please welcome Kevin Costner. The audience applauded warmly as Costner walked to the guest chair, shaking Jimmy's hand politely, settling in with the ease of someone who had done thousands of interviews and knew exactly how the game worked. He was dressed in classic Kevin Costner casual. Jeans, boots, a worn jacket that suggested he had just stepped off set or from a ranch. Not a wardrobe stylist. He looked like himself, not a product of television packaging. "Kevin, thanks for being here," Jimmy began, his tone outwardly respectful, giving no hint yet of what was to come. "Let's talk about Horizon. 4 films, nearly 3 hours each, shot back-to-back. That's insane." Costner leaned forward slightly, eyes bright with genuine enthusiasm. "It's a story that needs time to be told properly. Sprawling Western sagas about how America was really built can't be crammed into 2 hours." Then Jimmy's tone shifted subtly. "So, you also mortgaged your property to finance it?" Not outright mockery yet, but the edge was there. "That's a pretty big risk for a genre most people say is dead." "Westerns aren't dead," Kevin replied, steel creeping into his voice. "Good stories are never dead. And yes, I put my own money in because I believe in it. That's what you do when you make art. You commit fully, or you don't make it at all." Jimmy nodded, though his expression suggested a punchline was coming. "Really admirable, but Kevin, you've done this before, right? Bet everything on a big vision gone way over budget. I mean Waterworld, basically." Costner's voice dropped lower, and anyone familiar with his work knows that when Kevin Costner gets quiet, that's when you listen. "We're not doing this." The words cut through the set instantly. The atmosphere shifted. Jimmy's smile faltered, caught off guard by the directness of Costner's response. "I'm just saying there's a pattern," Jimmy began, hesitating now. "A pattern of me making the films I believe in, regardless of what people like you think," Kevin interrupted, controlled but unmistakably angry. "Is that the pattern you're referring to?" Jimmy asked, half teasing, half probing. The audience stirred uneasily. This wasn't the usual playful back and forth of a late-night interview. This was real tension, raw, escalating, and impossible to ignore. "Come on, Kevin, I'm just joking around," Jimmy tried, retreating to the standard defense of failed humor. No, Kevin said flatly. You're doing what people have done to me for 30 years, reducing my willingness to take risks into a punchline about failure. That's not humor, Jimmy. That's lazy comedy at the expense of someone who's actually created something. A nervous laugh escaped Jimmy, but the audience stayed silent, sensing the weight of the moment. Look, I didn't mean any disrespect, Jimmy said cautiously. Then what did you mean? Kevin asked, his voice carrying decades of enduring dismissal. You brought up Waterworld, something that's been mocked for decades. You mentioned budget overruns, which is code for saying I'm irresponsible with money. You framed my commitment to a vision as foolish obsession. What part of that wasn't meant to be disrespectful? The cameras kept rolling, capturing live television at its most unpredictable. Everyone in the control room knew they were witnessing something rare. Genuine anger from someone pushed past their limit. You know the difference between artists and comedians? Kevin continued, ignoring Jimmy's attempts to interrupt. Artists create something from nothing. We take risks. We put our money, our time, our reputations on the line to make something meaningful. And yes, sometimes we fail spectacularly, but at least we try. He gestured at Jimmy, at the set, at the whole machinery of late-night television. You sit behind a desk and make jokes about people who actually do things. You don't risk anything. You don't create anything lasting. You just comment on those who do. And when they fail, you mock them for having tried. Jimmy's face went from pale to red, unaccustomed to being confronted so directly. That's not fair, is it? Kevin pressed. Tell me, Jimmy, what have you created that will matter in 20 years? What have you risked everything for? What have you done that required courage instead of reading jokes someone else wrote for you? The silence was devastating. Jimmy opened his mouth repeatedly, but nothing he could say wouldn't make things worse. Writers in the control room scrambled for ideas, but there was nothing to save the situation. The truth was laid bare. There's a vast gulf between those who create and those who comment on creation. Waterworld, Kevin said, voice heavy with decades of defending the film. It cost $175 million and made $264 million worldwide. That's not a flop, but it's easier to mock than to acknowledge the truth. That narrative of failure, that idea that I was hubris incarnate, deserving to be taken down a peg, that made the jokes simple. But let me tell you what's real. That film employed hundreds of people, created technical innovations still used today, entertained millions worldwide. It exists. It's something I made that will outlive both of us. But sure, let's reduce it to a punchline about budget overruns because it's easier than acknowledging the guts it took to make it. Jimmy tried to regain control, to redirect. Kevin, I think you're taking this too personally. Too personally? Kevin's voice rose for the first time. You invited me here to discuss my new work, and the first thing you do is mock my past. How exactly am I supposed to take that? Laugh along while you disrespect the thing I've spent years creating? Play the good sport while you get cheap laughs at my expense? He stood up. The movement was decisive, final. The studio went silent. I've spent 40 years in this business making films that mattered to me. Some succeeded commercially, some didn't. But every single one of them was made with integrity, with commitment, with the belief that stories matter, and that taking risks is better than playing it safe. He began removing his microphone with practiced precision. And you know what I've learned in all these years? Kevin said, his voice steady but carrying decades of experience. I've learned to spot people more interested in tearing others down than building anything themselves. People who mistake mockery for wit. People who think making someone feel small somehow makes them big. What are you doing? Jimmy asked, genuine panic creeping into his voice as he realized this major booking was unraveling live on air. I'm leaving, Kevin said simply, I came here to talk about a film I believe in. Instead, I got cheap shots at my past work from someone who's apparently never understood the difference between failing at something ambitious and succeeding at something safe. You can't just walk off, Jimmy started, but Kevin's laugh cut him off. Not a friendly laugh, but something bitter, final. Watch me, Kevin replied. You had one of the last real movie stars on your show. Someone who's actually lived, taken risks, and has stories worth telling. And you wasted it making Waterworld jokes that stopped being funny in 1998. He placed the microphone carefully on the chair. Horizon is a story about people who risked everything to build something new, who faced impossible odds because they believed in something bigger than themselves. I thought that might resonate with an audience, but clearly I miscalculated. This show is about safe jokes and cheap shots, not about celebrating genuine ambition. Jimmy stood, perhaps thinking he could salvage the situation, or at least appear in control. Kevin, come on, don't be so sensitive. We're just having fun. That word, sensitive, Kevin said, turning to face him fully, is what people always say when they're called out for being cruel. Don't be so sensitive. It's just a joke. Lighten up. As if the problem is the person being hurt rather than the person doing the hurting. He walked toward the edge of the stage, each stride calm and deliberate. You want to know what real sensitivity is, Jimmy? Real sensitivity is understanding that when someone puts everything on the line for their art, mocking that commitment reveals more about you than about them. Real sensitivity is recognizing that not every target is fair game for comedy. Real sensitivity is having the empathy to see that what seems like an easy joke to you might be someone else's life's work. The audience began to clap slowly at first, unsure, then louder, building as they recognized the truth in his words. They were applauding Kevin's stand, his refusal to be belittled, his articulation of what many had felt but never heard spoken aloud. There's a difference between humor that elevates and humor that diminishes. You walk out now, you're showing everyone you can't take a joke, Jimmy called after him. One last desperate attempt to frame Kevin's exit as weakness. Kevin stopped and turned, his voice carrying the authority of 4 decades in Hollywood. Jimmy, I've taken jokes for 40 years about my roles, my films, Waterworld, everything I've risked or created or believed in, I've heard them all. From people funnier and smarter than you. He pointed at Jimmy, the gesture casual yet devastating. The difference is they had earned the right. They had created their own work, taken real risks. You sit behind a desk and read jokes written by someone else about people who actually do things that's not the same. When's the last time you put your own money into something you believed in? When's the last time you bet your house on a creative vision? When's the last time you did anything that required genuine artistic courage rather than showing up and reading from a teleprompter? The studio fell silent. Jimmy had no answer because there was none. Kevin had just articulated a truth that couldn't be argued. There's a fundamental difference between those who create and those who comment, between those who risk and those who mock. Horizon might fail, Kevin said, his voice quieter now, but every word carrying weight. It might lose money. Critics might hate it. Some might call it another folly. And you know what? I'll survive that too. Just like I survived Waterworld, The Postman, and every other so-called failure. But at least I'll have tried. At least I'll have put something into the world I believe in. At least I'll have taken a swing at something meaningful instead of playing it safe. He looked directly into the main camera, speaking to the audience at home, not the studio. And when I'm 80 looking back, I'll know I made films on my terms. I told stories that needed telling. I never let fear of failure stop me from attempting something extraordinary. Then he turned back to Jimmy one last time. Can you say the same when you're old and looking back at your career? Kevin asked, his voice calm but cutting. Will you be proud that you made fun of people braver than you? Will you feel fulfilled knowing your contribution was mocking those who actually created things? Is that the legacy you want? Jimmy's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. There was nothing he could say that wouldn't prove Kevin's point. You know what I hope? Kevin continued, now with a hint of sorrow layered under his anger. I hope that someday you create something, anything that requires genuine risk, genuine belief, genuine commitment. And when you do, when you finally understand what it's like to put yourself out there completely, I hope someone treats your effort with more respect than you've shown mine today. With that, he walked off the stage, leaving a studio in total disarray. A host scrambling to justify his approach, an audience that had just witnessed something far more real than scripted television could ever produce. Jimmy tried to continue the show, tried to make light of what had happened, to frame Kevin's exit as weakness or an inability to take a joke. But every word only reinforced Kevin's point. He had no understanding of the difference between humor and cruelty, commentary and mockery, punching up and punching down. The remaining segments felt hollow, the energy completely destroyed. The audience was subdued, processing what they had just seen, realizing they had been complicit in a moment of disrespect they hadn't recognized until Kevin spoke. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation spread across social media. Hashtag Kevin Costner started trending worldwide. Reactions poured in, overwhelmingly supportive, not just from fans, but from artists, creators, and anyone who had ever been mocked for taking a risk. Filmmakers, directors, actors, writers, all those who had faced ridicule for ambitious failures, praised Kevin for standing up for artistic courage. One prominent director tweeted, "He makes films because he believes in them, not because algorithms say they'll work. That takes courage talk show hosts will never understand." Entertainment journalists dissected the incident, concluding that Kevin had been entirely justified and that Jimmy had badly miscalculated by relying on outdated Waterworld jokes. Film critics debated the deeper issue, how society mocks risk-takers while celebrating those who play it safe, rewarding mediocrity and ridiculing ambition. The show's ratings suffered immediately. Publicists reconsidered booking other high-profile stars, weighing whether the promotional value was worth risking similar treatment. Several major appearances were canceled. The incident became a case study in alienating not just a single guest, but an entire community of creators who had watched one of their own, mocked for his courage. Jimmy issued a statement later that evening, not quite an apology, more a defensive explanation about how comedy pushes boundaries, and that Kevin misunderstood the tone. The statement landed poorly, exposing that he still saw the problem as Kevin's sensitivity rather than his own cruelty. Meanwhile, Kevin continued promoting Horizon through other channels. Interviews with journalists who wanted to discuss film, appearances on shows whose hosts understood the difference between challenging questions and cheap shots. On these platforms, he was generous with his time, insightful about his creative process, and clear that his walk-off wasn't about an inability to handle criticism. It was about refusing to participate in his own diminishment. The film itself, the project that sparked the entire controversy, became more than just another release. It became a symbol of artistic courage, of betting on yourself, and of refusing to let market forces or conventional wisdom dictate which stories get told. Whether it succeeded commercially or failed became almost secondary to what it represented. The courage to create fully and without compromise. It was a reminder that some artists still make art for reasons beyond profit, that some stories are told simply because someone believes they need to be told. The incident sparked broader conversations about how society treats ambitious failures versus safe successes. It forced people to ask whether we had become a culture so afraid of risk that fewer were willing to try. It made them question whether late-night comedy had devolved into nothing more than mockery, because actual wit requires more effort than pointing at someone else's failure and laughing. Some defended Jimmy, insisting celebrities should expect teasing, that Waterworld was fair game, and that Kevin was being too sensitive. But most observers recognized the deeper truth. There's a huge difference between gentle ribbing among peers and mocking someone's life's work to their face, between humor that elevates and humor that wounds. The walk-off highlighted a trend that had been quietly growing for years: established artists' refusal to tolerate disrespect. Just for promotional opportunities, Kevin Costner didn't need Jimmy Kimmel. His reputation was secure. His legacy was already cemented. He could promote Horizon through outlets that treated him and his work with the seriousness they deserved. What made this moment so powerful was that it was Kevin Costner, the man whose history of ambitious risks, spectacular failures, and historic successes gave him unquestionable authority to speak about artistic courage. He had risked everything, failed publicly, and succeeded beyond expectations. He had lived the life that gave him the right to say what needed saying, and what he said resonated far beyond defending Horizon or his past films. He articulated something every creator understands. True creation requires courage that commentators will never possess. Ambitious failure is more valuable than safe mediocrity. Those who mock risk-takers are almost always those who have never risked anything themselves. Kevin's walk-off became a cultural moment, not because it was explosive, but because it was principled. He didn't storm off in anger. He methodically explained why he was leaving, drew the line between legitimate criticism and lazy mockery, and demonstrated that dignity can be defended without losing composure. In the weeks that followed, other artists cited his stand when setting boundaries with media, declining appearances on shows that prioritized ridicule over meaningful conversation, and insisting that their work be treated with respect, even if it wasn't commercially successful. Kevin had given them permission to demand better. Jimmy Kimmel's show continued, but something had changed forever. The incident had exposed a subtle cruelty in late-night comedy that many had noticed but few had named so clearly. While the show's core audience still tuned in, the artistic community had learned a vital lesson. Treat creators with respect, honor their courage even when they fail, or watch them walk away while the audience cheers their exit. Kevin returned to being Kevin Costner, making films on his terms, taking risks others wouldn't, telling stories he believed in regardless of market research. The walk-off became another chapter in his legend, another example of why he remained one of the last real movie stars. Not because he always succeeded, but because he never stopped trying, never compromised his vision, and never let anyone convince him that artistic courage was shameful. The secret to his longevity wasn't avoiding failure. He had failed spectacularly multiple times. The secret was understanding that the only real failure is not trying at all. That mockery from the risk-averse is a badge of honor rather than shame. That artistic integrity, creative vision, and genuine courage matter more than the approval of people who've never created anything worth mocking in the first place. Jimmy Kimmel had hoped for viral content from Kevin Costner. He got it, but not the kind he expected. Instead of clips of Kevin laughing along with jokes about his failures, the internet was flooded with footage of an artist defending artistic courage, an audience applauding that defense, and a host learning the hard way that some targets aren't targets at all. They're creators whose work should be honored, whose courage should be celebrated, whose presence on your show is a gift that cannot be squandered for cheap laughs.